In the city of Pine Hill, a middle-aged woman was found dead at her apartment when her husband was away at work. The murderer disappeared, leaving no traces or hints, making it extremely difficult for the detectives who found the body. However, time played a crucial role in this shocking case. The people that you need to pay close attention to in this case were Daniel Garner, a veteran architect by occupation who was married to Linda, and Mark Johnson, a well-to-do financial advisor married to Jennifer. This is a very disturbing crime case you will know about today. Daniel Garner happened to be a man with a charming personality who shared what was classified as the perfect marriage with his wife, Linda. This couple shared a special bond with Mark Johnson and his wife Jennifer, a bond that surpassed a mere exchange of sharing meals together, a bond that involved them engaging in an act that should be classified as unheard of. These couples usually engaged in a swapping arrangement, which saw them sleep with each other's partner. Initially, it was all fun and games. Not until Daniel took it a step too far and started developing an attachment towards Jennifer, Mark's wife. Linda had noticed her husband's sudden attachment to Jennifer, which breached the concept of their agreement. She, however, made a vow to see to the end of it. Unknown to her, it would lead to something perilous in the near future. Daniel was a successful architect who had made a name for himself with his top-notch architectural designs, which were second to none. He had quite the perfect relationship with his wife Linda, who happened to be a successful teacher, and one who was loved by all, most especially her colleagues and students. They lived in a gorgeous apartment with an organized and colorful garden, which Linda cherished with her all. It was situated on Maple Street. 5 years earlier, Mark and Jennifer Johnson had moved to Pine Hill. This financial advisor had all the attributes of a youthful party animal. He was one with whom there was never a dull moment. His wife Jennifer was equally as cheerful, a woman with beauty hard to miss, one that attracted onlookers and made outsiders desire a friendship with her. This couple had burning characteristics that made for an enviable marriage. These two couples turned out to share the same interests and characteristics. Owing to this, they became attached with each other, mostly sharing each other's company. And all of a sudden, a silly idea was brought to the table. In one of their many hangout sessions, where they usually had a lot of wine coupled with other activities, someone in the group suggested they swap wives, probably in a desperate bid of adventure. This, however, wasn't frowned at. In fact, it was an adventurous idea, which was welcomed by the others. But it wasn't official yet, as it was thought to be caused by the intoxicating feeling of the red wine. However, this crazy idea had resurfaced in the next few weeks, and both parties were already on the verge of a mutual agreement, which they eventually sealed, with some boundaries attached with it, of course. And in no time, they have had their first experience. Initially, it felt weird to both parties, but it was still exciting and sort of an experimental escapade. However, as time passed, it became a regular occurrence that brought happiness and stability to both of their relationships. It also made the bond of both couples stronger, that they shared almost everything together, which included getaway trips and joint parties, while still guarding each other's secrets. This meant they couldn't speak about these occurrences outside the confines of their homes. However, this perfect arrangement soon began to fall apart when Daniel began showing more interest than he was supposed to towards Jennifer. And this he made very obvious by mostly looking for the slightest of reasons to be around her or spend time with her. Linda had previously ignored it as she noticed Daniel's change in behavior. Mark, too, had a hint of this deviation, but both had thought it to be an early stage of obsession that would probably soon fade off. But they were wrong. Daniel now found himself thinking mostly about Jennifer and their times together. Slowly, he lost himself and his thoughts, and also didn't care about losing his marriage with Linda. He had one thought, and one only: to have more of Jennifer. Unknown to him, the implications of such inappropriate cravings. Jennifer, who was for fun and leisure in the beginning, had suddenly turned into a breath of fresh air for Daniel, who saw himself mostly lost in thoughts about her, so much that it interfered with his daily activities. This was turning unhealthy for everyone. But Daniel only deteriorated. He started looking for ways to be mostly around Jennifer. He also started trying to play the role of Mark in her life. And this was greatly noticed by Linda. However, she downplayed it to the thrill of their new adventure and felt he would soon be over it, but he only got worse. He found himself mostly talking about Jennifer, her likes and dislikes, and also got irritated when he wasn't around her, all to the notice of his wife, who had made it a point of duty to confront him. And when she did, he dismissed her observations, claiming they were untrue and baseless, and that they were as a result of jealousy. At this junction, she took a step back in order to not seem problematic, and in order to not spoil their newfound adventure. But she kept on watching his moves. Daniel wasn't helping matters, as he was caught yet again lustfully staring at Jennifer for a long amount of time. Long enough to make Jennifer herself aware of the fact that his emotions were getting out of hand. Initially, she found it flattering, but then the frequency and intensity with which Daniel silently expressed his lustfulness began to increase, and this made Jennifer very uncomfortable. He became so attached to their times together that he began losing sight of the initial plan. He began touching her in ways that denoted deep feelings, and not a mere pleasure escapade. Jennifer had now grown deeply uncomfortable, and this she communicated to her husband Mark, who dismissed her, claiming Daniel probably just had a way of being overly expressive. However, things became clearer to all parties when in one of their bonding getaway escapades, Daniel insisted on having time alone with Jennifer, much to the dismay of Mark and Linda. Even when Jennifer attempted to bypass the situation, she was met with strong insistence and much pressure from Daniel. While they were at it, Daniel finally made his intentions known and crossed the line with a certain comment. He expressed his desire to start a new family with her, one away from the watchful eyes of her husband Mark and his wife Linda, who at that moment was eavesdropping and overheard all Daniel had said. Immediately, he said that Jennifer felt a wave of unease and at this point begged to excuse herself. Linda immediately seized the opportunity to confront her obsessed husband. This time, he was a little reluctant about denying the claim, but still didn't admit to any of them. At this point, Linda was growing frustrated because Daniel's obsession with Jennifer grew stronger with time. And she knew it was only a matter of time before it interfered with their marriage, but she still loved him. Daniel, on the other hand, had taken his obsession to the next level, showing up in Jennifer's day outside the arranged meetings, even as far as her yoga classes. At this point, Jennifer was getting scared. She knew what these types of obsessions led to if left unchecked, so she made a decision to confide in her friend. Her friend convinced her to give as much space as possible to Daniel if she wanted the obsession to ever come to an end. Jennifer wasted no time in taking heed. She even went as far as ending the arranged meeting altogether with hopes that it would trigger some sense into Daniel. At one time, Mark had attended an urgent business trip, leaving Jennifer all alone. Daniel saw his chance, and as expected, he was at her doorsteps unannounced. Jennifer couldn't hide her immediate shock. However, she led him into the sitting room to hear what he had to say. Daniel wasted no time expressing his fully developed feelings, proposing she accept him so they could start a new life somewhere far away. As usual, Jennifer turned him down, explaining once again the boundaries of their arrangements, and when Daniel would not be denied, in anger and fear of losing her marriage and her friendship with Linda, she announced to him that the arrangements altogether had been called off. Daniel tried to persuade her, but she had made up her mind. She did her best in avoiding him, even reporting the matter to his wife, Linda, who already knew beforehand. Linda, caught between pain and loyalty to her husband, promised to sit with him to discuss the matter. Daniel's feelings only deepened, and he continued showing up at her workplace in a bid to convince Jennifer. Jennifer was already feeling unsafe at this point, and decided to face him and explain the gravity of his request one more time. She reiterated the end of the arrangement once again and urged him to act appropriately. Daniel grew with rage as he was being rejected, and he made several accusations at her, which included leading him on and abandoning him afterwards. Jennifer, who was unfazed by those accusations, insisted on ending the arrangement. Linda had followed Daniel unknowingly to him, so she saw and heard all that transpired in that instant. She was filled with pain at seeing how desperately a man she called husband yearned for the attention and intimacy of another woman. But she had to act immediately because Daniel was unable to handle denial, and his passion for Jennifer was driving out the anger in him, seeing how determined she was not to give in. Daniel resorted to verbal abuse, and it was almost as though he was going to do something drastic the next minute. At this point, Linda came out of her hiding place and called out his name. Daniel, on seeing his wife, at that instant snapped out of his misery in a mixed feeling of confusion and shock. Jennifer took the opportunity and zapped away, while Linda consoled her husband, urging him to take things easy and let them devise a way to move past all that had transpired. In the coming days, the true extent of Daniel's obsession would come into play, leading to a most drastic decision that would cause pain and grief. The dramatic situation at the park continued to haunt Daniel. The utter rejection and the sight of his wife had left him in pandemonium and anger. His wife continued trying her best to curtail the situation while dealing with her own emotions. But Daniel would not listen to reason, as his emotions had eaten deep into him. Daniel had started deteriorating, even to the extent that he stopped going to work and spent a greater part of his time thinking about Jennifer's rejection and feeling a deep sense of injustice. Linda had her own emotions to deal with, frustrated and fearing what the future held for them. Little did she know that what the future held was bigger than all of them, and that she wasn't ready for it. None of them were. Jennifer had already moved forward, focusing on her marriage and work. She didn't tell Mark the extent to which Daniel's obsession had gotten to, probably in a bid to avoid any form of brawl or violence. She only hoped the end of their arrangement saw to it that Daniel came back to his right senses. But she was also wrong. Jennifer had come back from work one time, only to find Daniel patiently waiting for her. Her heart sank in fear at the desperation of this man in not letting her go. Her voice was faint as she begged him to leave, but he wouldn't listen to reason. Desperate to get away from the situation as soon as possible, Jennifer attempted to ignore and walk past Daniel. He, however, reacted in a shocking manner. He grabbed her hand as tight as he could, with rage in his eyes and an attempt to cause her pain. Jennifer was almost on the top of her voice from the pain she felt. However, a neighbor who heard her voice showed up to see what was happening. But Daniel had already fled. Jennifer, seizing the opportunity, ran inside to take shelter. She immediately called Linda in a bid to settle the matter without the involvement of the police. Linda, however, promised to visit her the next day so they could discuss how to handle Daniel's deteriorating behavior. At the cafe, Jennifer narrated the ordeal to an agitated Linda, who knew this couldn't obviously go on. She just tried to calm Jennifer down and promised to try to talk to Daniel in order to put him in check. When she got back home, she confronted Daniel about what happened on the night of the event, and Daniel responded by blaming Linda for conspiracy against him, adding that she was a betrayer. Linda, not wanting to escalate the matter, withdrew from her accusations immediately for her own safety. With the issue getting out of hand, Daniel's mind had grown wild and darker, that he couldn't accept rejection, and he started thinking of days to get better. And then, a dark thought had dawned on him. He reasoned that if he must feel better, then the source of his pain would have to be eliminated. He was either having Jennifer or no one was. Before that cold night, Mark had embarked on another journey, leaving Jennifer all by herself. Daniel, aware of this fact, made his way to her house, and there she was sleeping. Seeing her so peaceful and unaware made him rage even more. Jennifer woke up to the sight of Daniel and tried to scream and resist. However, Daniel covered her attempted scream with his hand. He was handling a kitchen knife, and with this, he left it in her chest, stabbing as deep as he could. She died instantly. Daniel fled the scene immediately in utter confusion, probably regaining his senses after the act was committed. His first point of call was his home, where Linda found him in bloodstains and in a state that suggested he had done something grave. She immediately realized what he had done and attempted to help him cover it up. After all, he was still her husband. Knowing the implications of Daniel's actions, she immediately sought to clean all traces of any evidence that would lead back to them. She ordered Daniel to have a hot shower, and she eliminated any trace of blood that could implicate him. She also asked him, like a kid, to recount the details the exact way it happened, and he did just that, reciting the events as they unfolded. Linda had made up a story that both of them were to give an account of, should they be confronted any time in the future. She also made a plan that would make this story stick, by calling a friend claiming Daniel had been with her all day. She also drove far away in order to burn the clothes and remnants of any blood-stained items that may implicate them. The police had soon found out about the tragic event and were on a mission to get to the bottom of the matter. And this they did by interrogating everyone they could come across. Daniel, who at this point was agitated, managed to avoid suspicion from the detectives and onlookers. He had withdrawn from both friends and relatives alike, which was bound to draw suspicions. Linda was incredibly composed and handled the situation with utmost prudence. She was always on her toes and alert as to any new development, to avoid being caught off guard by any means. She was a real pillar of support. However, she felt that they would need more than just a coherent story for attention to divert fully away from them. She suggested Daniel act as though he was devastated by the loss of Jennifer, so as to remove any form of suspicion. Daniel did just that. Speaking so fondly of Jennifer, he feigned sadness and distraught. Mark, Jennifer's husband, seemed to buy the whole narrative, and although he searched for answers, he appreciated the concern from Daniel and his wife. Daniel's mental state had begun deteriorating. He started seeing hallucinations and having nightmares, and he often abused alcohol. Linda, seeing this, became scared that he may one day confess in a drunken state, kept a close eye, and made sure he went nowhere or visited anyone at night. Daniel was already getting really depressed and guilty, and this he communicated to his wife, who suggested that they take some time away from the town in a bid to ease the tension. This helped them extensively. Linda moved over to the next stage, which was answering whatever questions came their way. She taught him how to respond to police questions and drilled him on how to respond without hesitation. Linda was so desperate to protect a lifestyle that didn't come overnight, and this fueled her desire to keep this case uncovered. Daniel, although still distraught, had learned to manage the situation properly and acted stable. However, Daniel's newfound bad habit, which was drinking, had started making onlookers suspect his involvement in the crime. As much as it circulated, Linda tried her best to quench the fire of such rumors. However, it was only a matter of time before the truth came to life. Detective Mitchell interrogated the couple in a bid to look for any irregularities that would probably suggest an involvement in the crime. Linda held her end perfectly. Daniel tried in holding his own end by telling it the way Linda had initially drilled him to act. But Mitchell could see right through him and suspected foul play. After weeks of investigation, proof had come to light, supporting Daniel's involvement in the crime. Forensics had analyzed Jennifer's phone and found a set of disturbing messages, which suggested that indeed Daniel was obsessed and possibly ended up killing her due to him being rejected by her. Daniel was immediately called again for another set of questioning. He tried really hard to maintain composure and stuck to it, but more evidence was resurfacing, and time was running out. A crucial piece of information which would finally solve the mystery came out. And on the day Daniel packed his car outside to carry out the deed, a neighbor who recognized his car had seen him and recalled that he behaved strangely when he was seen on the day of the murder. This information led to the police obtaining a warrant to search their house, hoping to find the truth. And behold, the police had found remnants of the burnt clothing and traces of Jennifer's blood, undermining Linda's effort in covering all that evidence. The evidence against them was too glaring and precise. From the burnt clothing remnant, to the traces of blood, to eyewitness accounts and phone information, all fingers were pointed to one person, and one alone: Daniel. He had begun giving into the pressure due to the weight of evidence against him, and Detective Mitchell saw his chance. He applied more pressure, prompting Daniel to finally spill all that happened that fateful day. Daniel narrated how his obsession led to his loss of control, hence leading him to commit the dreadful act. However, he didn't leave out any information from the confession, as he also implicated Linda, his wife. She was immediately contacted for questioning once more, yet she still held her end of the story and denied any involvement or knowledge of the case. But when a detailed account of Daniel's confession was shown to her, she knew it was the end of the road. She finally admitted to helping Daniel out of loyalty, and that she feared losing everything they had built together. This was the end of the road for them. They were immediately charged to the courts, a case which attracted the general public. A crowd awaited the verdict of a couple who in one way or other partook in the gruesome killing of Jennifer. Daniel was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole for his direct involvement, while Linda, due to her cooperation with the investigative process, was sentenced to 15 years imprisonment, with the possibility of parole after 10 years. Mark Johnson, Jennifer's husband, was left in shambles, and he had no other choice than to try to pick himself up and move past the situation. If you enjoyed this story, please leave a like for your favorite entertaining channel. A woman and her 2 daughters disappear mysteriously. Her husband, with whom she was perceived to have the perfect marriage with, was unbothered, claiming they had a slight altercation, which could have prompted her to disappear temporarily. However, the inquisitive nature of concerned neighbors, the CCTV device of a security-cautious neighbor, and the expertise of high-profile detectives all combined together to unravel a mystery, one in which, when the manner of killing and the places of burial were discovered, beat imaginations and messed with radical thinking. Chris Watts met Shanann Rusek in 2010 through Facebook. Shanann had been dealing with health issues and was initially hesitant about starting a relationship. However, Chris's patience and support won her over. They started dating, and their relationship quickly became serious. They got married on November 3rd, 2012 in Charlotte, North Carolina. They eventually moved to Frederick, Colorado, where they built a life together and had 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste. On August 13th, 2018, Shanann Watts returned home from a business trip after being away for a few days. She could be seen entering her apartment, looking tired. However, that footage would later become the last living activity of Shanann ever recorded. For some reason, Shanann's friend Nicole started panicking and came back to the house looking for Shanann, having not heard from her as planned the previous day. When Nicole got to the house, she was met with some footprints of events that suggested something had happened to her friend. Her car was still packed outside. Her shoe was seen at the doorpost, and her packed bag was still visible, which suggested Shanann was supposed to be in the house. However, she wasn't, and no one saw her coming out either. Tensions had begun rising at this point. Initially, Chris and Shanann's marriage was classified as the perfect one. They had beautiful children, great careers, and also a baby on the way. Chris was really crazy in love with his wife, to the extent that he would usually leave her romantic love notes on random occasions. However, Chris's and Shanann's marriage, like any love story, was beginning to have its bumps and hurdles. Ones which involved Chris's parents being at a crossroads with Shanann and not accepting her totally, and this she expressed to her friend Shane via Facebook. Chris, who was an introvert, with Shanann being the total opposite, was now becoming a very dominant figure in her life. Text messages shared between both of them revealed that Chris was beginning to express displeasure at the fact that Shanann was pregnant with another child. Chris's alibi was that he just got home from work and they were gone just like that. He claimed he didn't have the slightest clue as to where they would have gone. However, there was something noticeable about Chris's attitude which suggested otherwise. Chris's behavior was one that fluctuated from him being calm to one who became shaky in nature. He didn't express the slightest remorse, and whenever he referred to his girls, he usually did so in a past tense, which suggested that he was already mourning a loss. But they have only been declared missing, and a father who claimed to love his family like Chris claimed would hold on to every last hope he could. However, this was not the case with Chris, which suggested he knew something about their disappearance, something which may involve them never coming back. However, what the detectives were about to find out became an increasingly crucial finding in the case. During the visit to Chris's house, police saw a camera on the neighbor's house and inquired to see what it had captured. The neighbor showed the officers a footage of what his CCTV had recorded in the early hours of the day of their disappearance. There was no footage of Shanann leaving the premises with the girls. However, it does show Chris loading something into the back of his truck before eventually driving off. Detectives knew they had an important piece of this shocking case and had to invite Chris immediately to explain scenes in the footage. On seeing this footage, Chris began offering some unnecessary explanations, while also giving off a tense attitude. The fact that he wasn't asked for the explanations he was giving, coupled with his shaky nature, gave onlookers the impression that he wasn't entirely innocent. Most people felt that as a man who just lost a family he claimed to love, he should be at the forefront of the footage, probably rewinding and pausing it with eyes wide open in order to look for possible leads that may enable him to know the whereabouts of his family. However, he didn't give any such reaction. Instead, he was busy trying to defend his whereabouts and activities after he drove away.
Loading my stuff up in my coolers, my water jugs, my book bag, my computers, some of the tools that I had in the toolbox. I knew I was going to have to do some pumping into rubbers today. That's why I was out so far.
Chris may have thought he fooled everyone with his explanations, or probably they just let him believe that. However, one person wasn't holding back on his doubts and suspicions. Chris's neighbor insisted that Chris's actions caught on camera showed that he was hiding something he didn't want to be seen, because the whole time, he never came out in the open, knowing fully well there was a CCTV device monitoring the environment, and he placed his activities so strategically that the details were never fully captured. He also reiterated his suspicions, claiming that Chris was an introvert and one who never really talked, so the fact that he was trying so hard to defend himself denoted guilt, and that there was something he didn't want anyone to know about. It had become increasingly obvious that Chris was at the core of this case, especially with the event of him loading his truck suspiciously and his weird behaviors during the interviews. The detectives had already begun to interrogate him and made him the prime suspect, whilst searching for Shanann and her two daughters, Bella and Celeste. Chris was eventually face to face with an investigator in which he constantly denied knowing the whereabouts of his wife and daughters. For the better part of the interrogation, Chris seemed really confident. But these were professionals, and should Chris be one of those hardened criminals hard to break, they needed to be ready, and that meant not letting their guards down. And when the investigators saw they couldn't break the truth out of him, they suggested a polygraph test, which he readily agreed. It is important to note that at this point, Chris is not guilty. However, due to the mischievous nature of his recent behaviors, and owing to the fact that he was the last person to have come in contact with the missing people, he became a primary suspect, hence the need for the drilling. After agreeing to the polygraph test, he was urged to come back the following morning when the test would take place. The next day arrived pretty soon, and the investigator explained all the details he needed to know about the test. She began by asking him to lie about basic stuff, which he did, and she announced him as a terrible liar, which meant his polygraph test would be seamless. Little did he know she was just a smart detective in action. The test commenced, and usually, a polygraph test is considered a negative result following a -4 score. But Chris failed the polygraph test so badly that his score was at a bottom rate of -18. At this moment, investigators began to pressure him to divulge the truth, because with the highly negative result of the test, there was no chance he wasn't lying the whole time. Chris's stance remained the same, claiming he was going through some psychological stress, and the fact that he had failed the test proves nothing. But these intelligent detectives had other plans. In a bid to test Chris's resolve and the unwavering nature of his stories, they questioned his fidelity status, in which he claimed he was clean and had been a faithful husband. Unknown to him, detectives were aware of an ongoing relationship between him and a lady called Nikki Kessinger, with whom he had been having romantic dealings with over the months. But the detectives didn't break the news just yet. They wanted to test Chris's resolve, and after some hours of intense questioning, he finally gave in, admitting to the relationship. He claimed he felt ashamed for his actions, owing to the fact that his wife was pregnant and has been good to him. He also claimed that was one of the reasons why when she questioned him about the affair, he blatantly denied it. This was the first major progress they had made in getting the truth from Chris. However, the detectives knew there was more, and they were ready to give Chris as much time he needed to process and divulge the information they were seeking. The investigators kept wondering how his wife and his 2 kids had mysteriously disappeared, and they relayed that question to him. But he kept on denying, swearing and claiming he didn't know where his family was and that he was the victim. However, this patient detective decided to take the next major step. There is a technique in investigation called the John Reed technique, where the detective acts as a friend to the suspect, making them feel good about themselves and eliminating every trace of blame, and making them believe they understand why they must have committed the act, all in a bid to make them comfortable and further bring out a confession. The investigators used this technique against Chris immediately. They first accused him of not shedding a tear at all, but Chris continued to reiterate that it doesn't prove anything. The detectives then cut to the chase. They went straight to plan. They offered him a way out, accusing Shanann of killing the children, and imposed that on him as a probable reason why he killed her. He denied not knowing if she did anything to the kids, maintaining his ignorance of the situation. As of August 15, 2018, which was 2 days after they had mysteriously disappeared, Chris Watts was still maintaining his stand on not knowing where they had disappeared to or having a hand in it. Meanwhile, a scan had earlier revealed the gender of the baby Chris and Shanann were both expecting, and they named him Nico. With Chris's denial, the whereabouts of Shanann, their 2 daughters, and their unborn baby remained unknown. The detectives then came up with another very smart decision. They offered a better way out. They inquired if Chris would love to talk to someone he was comfortable with, someone like his father. Chris immediately took the offer. This would signify the next milestone of truth since the inception of this case. He told his father that he had brought the idea of a separation to Shanann, which she didn't take lightly, and that she expressed her rage by killing their 2 girls, which prompted him to kill her in return. After which, he buried her in a shallow grave and disposed of the girls in an oil tank at a site near his workplace. The investigators, on hearing this, knew they were close to the answers they were looking for. However, they still didn't believe his story, as Shanann didn't fit the character he tried to portray her as. Also, most people in that situation would most likely call the cops and not kill their spouse and dispose all of the bodies. Investigators located the bodies of Bella and Celeste in oil tanks on the property of Anadarko Petroleum, where Chris worked. The tanks were about 20 feet tall and contained crude oil. The recovery process, which began at about 10 p.m., took 1 hour before Shanann's body was eventually found and exhumed. It was found in a curled state, as though it was just thrown in. The process of recovering the girls, which was the hardest part, was about to follow. However, that needed proper planning, owing to the dangerous environment in which the girls were placed. This process took a whopping 14 hours. It was overseen by an employee of the oil company in which the bodies were located. They started off with the east tank, which contained about 9 feet of crude oil. When the tank was opened, the investigators had counted if any of the girls would have been able to pass through the opening due to its minute nature. But thankfully, they saw a blonde hair at the entrance, which suggested that the girls were forced right through it. At first, they would manually drain the tanks into another tank through a metal screen, where they could monitor it for any evidence that may pass through. Once the tanks were empty, they were deployed in 2s, wearing completely protective materials, one that protected them from hazardous substances. Even at that, they could only remain in each of the tanks for specific minutes, which would be followed by complete detoxification owing to the severity of the hazard emitted. In the east tank, they located Celeste, who was still in her nightgown and her diaper, covered with crude oil. The same process was repeated for Bella, who was bigger than Celeste. Nicole Kessinger, Chris Watts' mistress, provided a detailed account of her relationship with Chris during interviews with law enforcement. Kessinger first met Chris in June 2018 at Anadarko Petroleum, where they both worked. She was under the impression that he was separated from his wife Shanann, and in the process of divorcing, a lie Chris maintained until the murders were discovered. During their affair, which escalated quickly, Kessinger and Chris spent significant time together while Shanann and their daughters were away visiting family. Kessinger believed Chris's claims and even considered a future with him, evident from her Google searches on topics like wedding dresses and marrying your mistress. In her police interview, conducted 3 days after the murders, Kessinger expressed shock and horror upon learning the truth about Chris's family situation and his actions. She cooperated fully with investigators, providing insight into her relationship with Chris and his behavior, even though she added some irregularities, like her deleting all her messages and every trace of her relationship with Chris, or denying not knowing his wife's name. Kessinger revealed that Chris had continued to contact her even after his family was reported missing, seeking reassurance about their relationship. She ultimately decided to end the affair, suspecting that something was terribly wrong. In one of their final exchanges, Chris sent her a message that Kessinger interpreted as a farewell. She responded with a warning, telling him that if he had done something bad, it would ruin both of their lives. Chris replied, denying any harm to his family. This was the last communication before his arrest. However, the question on everyone's lips remained, how did the murders really happen? Chris Watts provided a detailed confession about the murders of his wife Shanann and their 2 daughters, Bella and Celeste, during a 5-hour interview with law enforcement on February 18, 2019. Chris claimed that the tragedy unfolded early in the morning of August 13, 2018. He said that he and Shanann argued after he confessed to having an affair and wanting to separate. In a fit of rage and desperation, Watts strangled Shanann to death in their bedroom. After killing Shanann, Chris said that Bella walked in and saw him wrapping her mother's body in a sheet. He carried Shanann's body to his truck and loaded Bella and Celeste into the vehicle. During the 45-minute drive to an oil field, Chris considered taking his own life, but decided against it. At the oil field, Chris buried Shanann in a shallow grave. He then smothered Celeste with her blanket while Bella watched. After placing Celeste's body in an oil tank, he returned to the truck and smothered Bella, who fought back, pleading, "Daddy, no," before he killed her and placed her body in another oil tank. Chris Watts was arrested on August 15, 2018, and charged with multiple counts, including first-degree murder and unlawful termination of a pregnancy. You would recall that Chris falsely claimed that Shanann had killed their daughters, leading him to kill her in rage. However, facing overwhelming evidence, he eventually confessed to all the murders. On November 6, 2018, Chris pled guilty to avoid the death penalty. His plea deal was influenced by Shanann's family desire to avoid prolonged legal proceedings and further emotional trauma. Chris was sentenced on November 19, 2018, to 5 life sentences without the possibility of parole. During the sentencing hearing, Shanann's parents, Frank and Sandra Rusek, made emotional statements. Despite the enormity of Chris's crimes, they expressed forgiveness, largely influenced by their faith. They emphasized their desire to honor Shanann and the girls by choosing forgiveness over hatred, hoping it would bring them some measure of peace. Chris's parents also spoke, expressing their forgiveness and sorrow. This approach was rooted in their religious beliefs and the understanding that forgiveness was a crucial step in their healing process. However, Chris's mother wasn't having any of these. Chris Watts' mother, Cindy Watts, publicly expressed her disapproval of her son's decision to accept a plea deal. She believed Chris was coerced into pleading guilty to the murders of his wife Shanann, their 2 daughters Bella and Celeste, and the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy. Cindy felt that Chris should have fought the charges instead of pleading guilty to avoid the death penalty. Cindy Watts shared her concerns in interviews, revealing that she and her husband Ronnie were only allowed limited contact with Chris following the arrest. They were given brief visits and felt shut out of discussions regarding the plea deal. Cindy stated that she couldn't reconcile the violent acts Chris was accused of with the son she knew, and she struggled to accept the narrative presented by the prosecution. Despite the overwhelming evidence against him, Cindy believed Chris should have pursued a not guilty plea and fought the charges in court. But something remained lingering. From someone as deceptive as Watts, there was a possibility that the full story never came to light. Sherlyn Cadle, an author and true crime enthusiast, became involved with Chris Watts' case after she reached out to him in prison. Cadle and Watts began corresponding in early 2019, with their exchange resulting in hundreds of letters and phone calls. Cadle visited Watts in prison multiple times as she worked on her book, Letters from Christopher: The Tragic Confessions of the Watts Family Murders. In her book, Cadle reveals disturbing details from Watts about the murders, which he had not disclosed during initial police investigations. Watts described in detail how he had premeditated the murders and the gruesome manner in which he killed his pregnant wife, Shanann, and their two younger daughters, Bella and Celeste. Watts admitted to attempting to smother his daughters twice and described the horrific final moments of their lives. Cadle's involvement brought additional public attention to the case, particularly following the release of the Netflix documentary American Murder: The Family Next Door. Her book provided a deeper insight into Watts' psyche and his confessions, revealing his twisted rationale and the calculated nature of his crimes. Watts initially cooperated with Cadle, allowing her to use his letters for the book. However, after the book's publication, he expressed regret and dissatisfaction with how his story was presented. Despite this, Cadle has maintained that her intention was never to justify his actions, but to provide a truthful account of the horrific events. We would love to know your thoughts on this case. Being one of the most heart-wrenching cases we have ever covered, your comments would be much needed.
A young mother who lived in Lexington, Kentucky, was out on a one-night spree of making bad decisions until she came in contact with a man who shared her obsession. Little did she know this man was one with a knack for defenseless praise, and that their paths crossing would lead to her going missing for 6 months and very shocking discoveries. On January 3, 2019, 3 men, namely David, Isaiah, and Brandon, who worked together on a night shift job, decided to release some tension by going out to have a couple of drinks in a bar. They hoped to have a lot of fun, which would include drinks, women, and the likes, notwithstanding the fact that on nights like these, people usually get what they bargained for, or probably get much more. On the other hand, 23-year-old Savannah Spurlock had lied to her mother that she needed her car to go pick some food, when in real time, she was actually going to pick up 2 friends of hers, namely Jocelyn Hutch and Dion Johnson, so they could have a night out. Savannah, who had a tough past few months ranging from the fact that she wasn't expecting twins, to the birth of her twins, which happened to be her 3rd and 4th children, to losing the children to her boyfriend after an undisclosed event happened at the hospital. Coupled with the fact that she had a pending court case for January 7, 2019, after being charged with driving under the influence or DUI, Savannah just needed a break, and this outing seemed to be really essential for her. Savannah and Jocelyn then drove to Dion's house, after which they parked along the street, with Savannah leaving her big purse behind and carrying a small clutch bag, before they entered into Dion's home, which saw them begin their pre-game drinking, before eventually heading to the bar at 1:30 a.m. They headed to a local bar called The Other Bar. However, the 3 men mentioned earlier found themselves in the other bar too, to drink Jack and Coke after going to a bar called Two Keys Bar, and leaving the bar for high-cost reasons. Savannah and her friends were having their own sets of drinks when they were met with another friend of theirs called Kayla Hamlin, who didn't take long before calling it a night, but not without taking a photo of them. Dion, too, had announced his intentions to leave early due to the fact that he had a court appointment the next morning, but Savannah and Jocelyn opted to stay back, claiming they would be just fine, and he went on his way. Meanwhile, Savannah's mother, Ellen Spurlock, who had realized that Savannah wasn't coming back with her car anytime soon, decided to report the car as stolen to the Richmond Police Department, who immediately swung into action looking for Savannah and the car, but were unsuccessful because Savannah was well out of their jurisdiction. Ellen then opted to put Savannah's friends on red alert, and the lookout for Savannah had begun. Back at the other bar, Savannah and Jocelyn had gotten into an altercation, one so serious that they had to be separated and threatened eviction by the bouncers of the club. Immediately after settling them, Savannah began flirting with some of the men in the bar, while Jocelyn decided she was done for the night and wanted to go home. She got a ride, but only after Savannah had assured her that she could make it home on her own. Savannah had continued flirting until she got to the table of David, Isaiah, and Brandon, who were just about to take their second round of drinks. However, after a short time of drinking together, the group decided to quit the bar, but Savannah wasn't done partying, so she decided to join them wherever they were going. Brandon's and Isaiah's houses were out of the question for continuing the party, owing to the fact that Brandon lived with his family, while Isaiah's house had no furniture in it, so they settled for David's house, which was in Lancaster, Kentucky. The last time Savannah would ever be seen in a video happened when a nearby CCTV captured her walking with the three men to their various cars, where they would later drive to David's house, with David driving alone, while Savannah drove with the other two men who were going to take a longer route. Ellen Spurlock was eventually able to reach Savannah via FaceTime call, and she could recall seeing her with someone in the car she was in. Savannah promised to be back home the next day, claiming she would take a cab which would take her to the car before she would eventually drive home. After this, Savannah put her phone on flight mode to avoid being disturbed by Ellen one more time, a move she was bound to regret. The next day arrived, and Savannah was nowhere to be found. However, Ellen's car was found by a friend of Savannah's, and the stolen car report was called off, with the car being returned to Ellen. But Savannah still wasn't home. Even though it was normal for her to usually not return home immediately, the fact that her social media handles were dormant and no updates were forthcoming actually kickstarted the worries, with a missing person report filed to the Richmond Police Department immediately. The search had begun, with flyers of Savannah and broadcasts of the last footage recorded of her published all over the TV stations and newspapers, as well as appeals for the identification of three young men with her that day. The three men were eventually identified, with David being the first to be interrogated. The young man gave his account, claiming that they listened to some music together in which Savannah danced a little, and that basically all they did was drink more and dance before Isaiah finally left the premises, as at that time he was in the bathroom vomiting due to the excessive drinking. He admitted there were some fooling around, but no one took advantage of Savannah. Even though she seemed weak and was going to pass out, he claimed to have taken her to bed with the intention of giving her a ride home in the morning. During the time investigators were questioning David, they obtained a search warrant for his house, truck, and his cell phone, all of which he willingly surrendered to them. They also looked for the presence of any nearby CCTV device close to David's house, any of which could back his story, since that was the last place Savannah was last seen. It was already 5 days of Savannah going missing, and the police decided to interrogate Brandon, one of the guys Savannah was out with on the day of the incident, and he gave much the same story David had, corroborating the fact that there was some element of body contact, but as far as he knew, none of them had intercourse with her. But while Brandon was getting at his story, the detectives pointed something irregular about it, which made him rethink.
They got a fucking misdemeanor.
Yep.
Abuse of a corpse. A misdemeanor. Class A.
And I've worked a case where
She was wrapped up in a fucking tarp in the back of the truck. And they dumped her.
I've worked one where the person provided the vehicle that the person used to move a dead body, and that person who provided the vehicle, knowing what it was going to be used for, is already out of jail, and they're out walking around right now. So, I mean,
It's time to fucking tell the truth.
Yeah, but that's
whatever's holding you back, and you think it's so bad.
nah. But
If you'll just tell us, it's probably really not that bad, because there really isn't anything that we haven't heard or seen of.
Yeah, but
That we haven't dealt with as far as when it comes to this kind of stuff.
the thing that we most was worried about was whether or not, you know what I'm saying, if she had alcohol poisoning or
Good.
anything wrong with her, you know, along those lines. That was the
If she
thing.
had too much to drink,
Yeah.
or what about if David was going to do something he probably shouldn't to a girl that wasn't awake and able to say no?
David had claimed to sleep on the couch, leaving the bed for Savannah. However, the couch had no recliner, meaning there was no possible way for one to sleep on it unless, of course, they would have to sleep while sitting. The investigators at this point knew Brandon had nothing to do with the disappearance, but wasn't letting them on in all he knew, so they applied a little more pressure. The investigators recounted Brandon's events, which involved people in the past who knew about a murder or were involved indirectly, mostly by conveying the body, and how they faced the law as though they were the murderers. The investigators then moved to Isaiah in a bid to get his own version of the story. His story matched that of Brandon's, but the investigators felt he knew more, particularly now that David was becoming the main suspect, owing to the fact that he had a more considerable amount of time alone with her after they had left. However, Isaiah refused to point fingers at David, claiming that even if Brandon knew David more, David didn't seem like one who would hurt her. According to him, David does keep to himself most times, but they got used to it. The investigators decided to search through the phones of Brandon and Isaiah. Forensics also had a go at Isaiah's SUV, and their findings corroborated with the story. On the other hand, a thorough search of David's house revealed some incriminating findings, which included packs of condoms, a rifle, knives, and splatters of blood on the ground. Usually, this should be enough to conclude he was the culprit. However, it wasn't, but something more interesting and particularly disturbing was found. It was a notebook which contained a handwritten letter by David himself. It read, "How do you explain the feeling of nothingness to a normal person, that death befalling on all those around you has no effect? I felt so alone, so damaged that I've created fake personas around everyone I know, hoping to fit in, to feel accepted. It only makes me angrier. I keep the dark, true side of myself hidden in the deepest places of my mind and have done so successfully for years, hell, my whole life. I feel no true love for anything now that I know what I really am. I see a greater need to hide my true self, but I just want to be free. I stay in a constant state of aggravation. Nothing seems to help anymore. How do you look for your mother in the eyes and tell her you're a born psychopath? That she gave birth to a monster? Someone who wouldn't care a bit to squeeze the last breath of life out of another human, or plunge a knife into their chest and smile about it?" This seemed to be the manifesto the investigators had been looking for, hence they took David a little bit more seriously. However, there was still no concrete proof, and all they had now was still based on speculation. The investigators finally had access to CCTV footage close to David's place, and it captured him loading his truck with 2 black bags. On the day the house was inspected, it was sparkling clean. Hence, the investigators became confused at this point if David was just loading his truck with garbage from his cleaning, or he was actually cleaning up his murder act. The results from the swab test done earlier had finally arrived, and there was still no evidence to hold David or any of the other men accountable for the death of Savannah, as the blood samples neither matched David nor Savannah. The police extended their search to the house of David's parents, Alan and Ultra Sparks, but still nothing to show. They even went as far as interrogating David's lifelong friend named Haley Hinko, who was serving term at a local jail, and she reassured them that David wasn't a person of such nature and that he was a nice person.
We're just wanting to basically get a character, how his character is, how he was.
He's an amazing dude, for real. I went to jail when my little boy was almost 1. He took care of my kid. He has my kid's name on his arm. He's always been a good dude. He's always come to my rescue when I needed him.
Okay.
He's a good dude, for real. He's went to church with his mom and dad's always went to church with my mom.
Mm-hmm.
His uncle used to be a pastor at my church.
Okay. Was there anything, you told us multiple times he's a good dude, helped you, and we get that, but was there any time that he might have said or done anything that was kind of out of character for him, and you'd be like, man, that's kind of weird coming from David?
No.
Never seen him do nothing or get real pissed off at somebody, or?
He's never really got angry with me. I mean, I've broke his heart 10,000 times, and he still comes back the same way he left.
Basically making sure that, or just asking you, did he ever distribute any behaviors that was like, he's a little weird?
No.
Anything like that?
He's an awkward person until you get to know him, you know what I mean? He comes off really weird, but once you get to know him, he's not.
David's attorney opted to clear the air on the letter found in David's house, claiming it was written at a time when David was faced with depression. The rigidity of the case made it a hard one to crack, and the community were left wondering what happened to Savannah. Was she alive and somewhere hidden? Or was she dead? And if she was dead, who killed her? Savannah's mother had started making rounds on the television stations, claiming her daughter would ghost for this long if she wasn't taken against her own will. She also begged Savannah to come back home if she was alive, and that everyone missed her. Time had passed, and people were beginning to go back to their normal way of life, with David moving in with his parents, and Isaiah and Brandon moving in with their father. Savannah's friends and family were left to wonder what had happened to their friend and daughter respectively. All hope seemed lost until this breakthrough arrived. On July 10, 2019, Richmond Police Department got a call from the attorney representing David's parents about a strong foul odor coming from a strawberry patch in their backyard, and that the police needed to come check it out right away. However, something noteworthy was happening at the time this event occurred. David Sparks drove himself to the police station, sealing his car, and on entering the station, he said he was going to need a lawyer. Upon arrival, investigators discovered a foul odor and disturbed ground in the backyard of the property. They began digging in the area, eventually uncovering human remains buried in a shallow grave. The body was wrapped in plastic bags and secured with tape, indicating an attempt to conceal the crime. The Kentucky State Police, alongside the FBI, cordoned off the area to conduct a detailed forensic examination. Personal items belonging to Savannah Spurlock were found near the body, which included clothing and other belongings she had on the night she disappeared. The investigators decided to invite Alan and Alta to give their account on what they found and how they found what they found. This included long hours of question and answer sessions in which Alan described how he was working on the backyard when he started perceiving the weird odor. His wife was also interrogated, and she gave her own account which matched that of her husband. The remains were quickly transported to the state medical examiner's office, where they were identified as Savannah Spurlock through dental records. This confirmation marked a significant breakthrough in the months-long investigation into her disappearance. During the autopsy, the tapes used to bind Savannah matched those found in David's room, and the backpack found had blood which matched both Savannah and David's DNA. However, because of insect tampering and decomposition of body, investigators could not ascertain the cause of death, but it was ruled as a homicide confidently, based on where the body was found and the attempt to conceal it. David Sparks was finally arraigned for the murder, in which he pleaded guilty. This earned them a minimum of 15 years in prison for murder and 12 additional years for tampering with evidence and another 12 for abuse of corpse. These sentences were to run concurrently. The term of 50 years was agreed upon by attorneys because they could not prove beyond reasonable doubt as to why he killed her. David did not deny the act, but he, however, refused to give a reason for it. David is now serving his term at the Southeastern State Correctional Complex in Kentucky, where he would be eligible for parole in 2039. If you enjoyed this story, please like and let us know your thoughts in the comment section. Also, do not forget to subscribe if you haven't already done so, and turn on post notifications so as to not miss any of our jaw-dropping episodes.